just to briefly touch on who I am, I'm Zwalies Jansen van Rensburg, a very passionate youth development advocate, and I have been called to protect the future of the human race, and that is the youth. They are the leading generation of our future, and it is absolutely critical for me to protect them, advocate for them, and encourage them to take hands with me as we combat the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, challenge inequalities and injustices, but moreover, strive towards living in a more prosperous future. I've always said that living a life with no human right is not a life worth living. And many times you will hear people say, you don't understand the magnitude of problems because you are too young. But I've always said that there's no age by which you should feel you can attain to understand the need, to understand a community that needs help and needs assistance. Whether it be the gift of love or the gift of time or anything you have to offer, there's always something to give. And the SDG number 2, which is creating a world free of hunger by the year 2030, has been an incredibly significant SDG to focus on in my journey, because the global issue of food insecurity has shown an alarming increase since the year of 2015. And many have said as well that the possibilities of ending this fight might seem impossible, but I always say we can sure die trying. I have combated SDG 2 personally by planting various food gardens within my community that is sustainable, as we can replant them and they can be reused. And this is a testament to us moving in the correct direction, not only as a South Africa, but as a collective world. On Nelson Mandela Day, I was privileged to hand out 67 meals to people in my community. And though this might seem like a small number, I understood the magnitude of what it meant to invest in the people of your country and the people of the world, because something as small as a meal can really be life-changing to anyone who might be in need of it. I have always promoted inclusivity of diverse demographics, and this is my ultimate mission. And it's rooted in the belief that unity and humanity combined is one of the most powerful forces the world has to offer. But I sit here today at 18 years old, and I believe that that is a testament to where we want to see the world moving into. It's the world I aspire to create, because no matter how unqualified, how young, or how old you may be, you have the ability to make a lasting impact. So what we witness here today is a reflection of the world, that ordinary individuals like myself have the ability to vocalize what I believe in, have the ability to take a stand, and have the ability to integrate my dreams that I wish to see the world be in. I'm here towards building and reshaping our nation, particularly in a time where we feel that division is so usual. It's become normalized, it's a common thing, and it's something that I do not believe is right. The world is a space for connection, and we should be transcending international borders. So I believe that other nations can truly take pride in what we do as South Africans, and they can really look at our policies and measures that we have implemented as trailblazers, so that they can embrace the accolades we have achieved and see how we can move forward collectively, and to prove that people under 30 can contribute to social justice. So like I mentioned, regardless of age, regardless of qualifications, there is an innate understanding of what is right and what is wrong. And as I conclude, I want to get you all thinking, how can we become more involved in combating this SDG? As a part of the youth, I represent them. I have seen that the world has become a digital dynasty, and it's an important aspect for me to invest in that. So by partnering with organizations or contributing to facilities the United Nations has initiated, which is the World Food Program, called Share a Meal, Share the Meal. You can share a meal with someone by simple contributions and donations by something as little as 80 cents. And I believe that that is a true testament of the capabilities of each one of you in this room. You don't need to be on a high caliber, but you have the ability to make an impact if you believe in what you say and you believe in your heart. I've always said that being led by purpose is the true beauty of a life worth living, and that is what I'm here to do today, to prove to you, no matter how different you may be, it's something to celebrate and it's something to honor. Let's work together towards a more sustainable future and a more sustainable world. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention and reminding us all about the importance of the human rights for all people without distinction of any kind, and all human rights for all people. Um, Given the richness of the inputs, there will be no question and answers, unfortunately. Okay. But I think we just need to sort of to conclude and not to speak too long then. I think this session started off with a protest. And I think Professor Madonsela contextualized that protest. And it's the nature of the South African way of doing things. And oftentimes it creates discomfort, but in discomfort comes change. And it's nothing personal against Andreas Peshka, who is, and I know we will have a discussion after this over coffee and tea and find a way of engaging around these issues, because there's areas of agreement and there's areas of disagreement, and we always find ways of engaging. What this session and the previous session reminded us is that hunger and poverty isn't natural. It's as a result of deliberate policies. Poverty and hunger is created by toxic economies, harmful to workers, harmful to the environment. And part of what we're engaging with is how do we undo that? The Zero Hunger Program aligns with what Professor Cameron spoke about earlier, Justice Cameron, about also food systems and how do you change food systems, including the food carbon footprint that Brazil pioneered so well, where they had part of their Zero Hunger Program was food needed to be produced and consumed within a particular set of kilometers, which meant that small farmers were privileged, small markets were privileged, as opposed to the big corporations. What he failed to mention, because he's an excellent diplomat, is that that's also what created the opposition to President Lula domestically and internationally, because he was challenging the power of massive corporations where food globally is vertically integrated from consumption to where you actually, where it gets produced. And these are part of the food systems issues we need to deal with, so it doesn't become an issue of charity and aid only. It has to be a systemic change issue. So let us ensure that when we engage at multilateral level, at national level, these are the issues, and let's not forget individual agency. I want to conclude again by saying that we live in a world where people are deplatformed all the time for the positions they take. Our own Justice Cameron was deplatformed for his position on Palestine at a university in the US, and we had to intervene, and our own Catherine was deplatformed from a major European car maker for her position on Palestine. And I think Andreas is reminding us, let's not deplatform, let's engage. Okay, let's find ways of engaging, but it doesn't mean that we mustn't call out what is right and what is wrong. On that note, I'd like to thank all the panelists for the engagement and the entire process from beginning to end. Thanks. We'll have that 2 minutes over tea, Aisha. Okay, thanks. Back over to you. So there's some, you can help me with the gifts? Right. So there's a gift for each one of you before you go. You have to declare it as well.
grateful. I'm just looking because somebody's taken my one book, but I had notes in it. It's not this one. Let me leave this one here. It's not this one either.
Yes, notes I can see.
Perfect. Is this his phone? And I think this is his also. No, this I don't know. I think that's it. Perfect. No, go put your stuff down. I'm gonna step past you gently.
I think I have.
She's taken everything. I just wasn't sure if that was yours. And I just said your glasses, your phone. Yes, no problem. Thank you.
Did want to mention the code.
No, it's perfect.
Hello. Good, and you? It's on, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Just making sure it's appears.
Just like, yeah. Thank you. Good day, everyone. If I may ask that we settle down for this next part of the program. My name is Kwezi Mzilikazi, and I work at Rhodes University. I would like to invite our next set of speakers to the stage, please. Professor Madonsela, Ms. Nkata Ntamburi, Dr. Samkelo Bala, Professor Scott Dreamy, or a representative of that team, and Dr. Yvonne Erasmus. I have promised Catherine that we will try and claw back some time. We were originally allocated 75 minutes, but we're going to try and see if we can do this in 35 to 40 minutes. And so in an effort to save some time, I'm going to invite all of you colleagues to catch up with the bios of our speakers from pages 18 onwards in our program, or in our book of programs. So the way that this session is structured, we're going to have what we call an anchor panelist. That will be Professor Madonsela, who will have 10 minutes to present, after which we will have presentations from the other 4 speakers, who I'm going to plead with to take between 6 and 8 minutes. Professor, may I check if you are going to have a PowerPoint presentation? Okay, so you're happy to go ahead. All right. Over to you then.
Speak. Okay, honored guests, esteemed colleagues, thank you once again for a privilege to present. My paper is titled "The Stray Bullets That Mark the Social Justice of Hunger." I see that the organizers corrected me. They put both of social injustice in the same bracket. This is when you edit and you don't know why the person did it the way they did. So, but what should be in brackets should only be social, and justice should be outside the bullet. From time immemorial, it has been understood that justice is the glue that binds societies together. We get this in Plato's Republic. We get this in the treatise of Luigi Taparelli when he invented the concept of social justice. We get this in the Treaty of Versailles. We get this in the conversations that led to the UN Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's also reflected in the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, CERD. And at academic level, we get that understanding from the quote I made this morning from John Rawls, who says justice is the greatest of virtues in society. And that doesn't come from John Rawls, actually, it comes from Plato in Plato's Republic. So if justice is the greatest virtue in society, or the most important of all virtues, why are we gathered today and having listened to speakers who say that one of the greatest injustices of our time is the injustice of being excluded from eating? My paper then suggests that it is a systems problem. The bulk of people are hungry not because anybody decides to exclude them from eating. Yes, in some wars, as we've seen in Gaza, there is a deliberate embargo on food and the weaponization of food as a weapon of war, which of course is prevented by the 1948 Geneva Conventions. But those are extreme cases. In our countries, as we are in this room, more than 10 countries, those who are hungry are not hungry because some malevolent person has decided to deprive them of food. It's what I refer to as stray bullets. But before I go into the stray bullets, I want to give you our definition of social justice. Our definition of social justice is that social justice refers to justice concerned with embracing the humanity of all persons, characterized by equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms by all, regardless of human diversity. This has to be reflected in just, equitable, and fair distribution of all opportunities, resources, privileges, benefits, and burdens in and between societies. At the core of social justice is ensuring that in a society, which is the commonwealth of people with a shared humanity mindset, nobody finds it more difficult to thrive, and no group finds it easier than others to thrive. So of course, societies that are based on slavery are unjust to those live enslaved. Colonial countries are unjust. Apartheid countries are unjust, patently unjust. But the modern societies are not unjust because they decide you won't get benefits because of your color, because of your sex, unless you're in Afghanistan. But the average society is not going to be directly unjust to you. So where does the injustice come from? It is my view that the injustice comes from failure to recognize humanity when it presents itself different from those who make laws and policies. So let me go back to John Rawls, who simplified justice as fairness to all, 1971. His view was that a society would be just when there's a shared understanding of what is just, And that shared understanding of what is just would then be the principle that is reflected in all institutions of that society, from the family right up to government and the constitution. And that fairness to all for John Rawls had two dimensions: equality of access to all human rights, opportunities, and freedoms, and a difference principle, which was recognizing different circumstances and also recognizing different contributions. So the difference principle would be, for example, that if there's an athlete who runs faster than others, their compensation would generally have to be proportionate to the fact that they ran faster than others. But the same difference principle, John Rawls was saying, it should still be to the advantage of the least advantaged in society, meaning that if there's somebody who has disability, as we were reminded by our colleague Dr. Leroux this morning, then they shouldn't be punished for nature's arbitrariness. It's nature or it's misfortune that makes you disabled. So if you distribute resources, you'll still have to compensate for nature's arbitrariness. What is missing in John Rawls's approach to social justice is something that Justice Moseneke adds in Minister of Finance versus Van Heerden, which is the restitutive element. That not everyone who's left behind is because of nature's arbitrariness. In societies where there's been malevolence by the state through slavery, colonialism, sexism, and racism, then those who are left behind are not because they are unfortunate due to nature. They're left behind because the previous state threw them behind. So part of then justice, as we see it today, we build on John Rawls's approach, we build on Luigi Tapparelli's approach, but then we add the restitutive element. Now, where are the stray bullets? Just quickly, Program Director, is when we pass laws in all of our countries that are not about equality, you're just passing a law for everyone. Who do you tailor it for? We pass laws for all, but we tailor them for ourselves. They tailored to what would be convenient to us. They tailored for what would be easy for us to comply with. And that's why I had a conversation, for example, with Justice Cameron, is that it's not bad intentions. It's when we assume the things that are easy for us to do will be easy to do for those who are in the margins of society as well. So I'm going to leave the whole question of the fact that the processing of food is time as well. So certain foods take more time to process, certain foods. But the example that I've used, I'm going to make 3 presentations at this conference. One is the stray bullets. How are they created? The next presentation would be what tool are we suggesting to avoid those stray bullets? The last presentation I'm going to make will be how do we use AI to make the use of that tool fast? In other words, how do we invest in GovTech the way they've invested in FinTech to make financial decisions easier to make, more proficient and more proportionate? So here, the example we've done at the Center for Social Justice, working with colleagues from Sweden, Malawi, and various other countries, was just to look at COVID-19. So COVID-19 was a global challenge, and our governments kindly decided to pass laws or regulations to stop COVID-19 from spreading. But when they passed those laws, they didn't use anticipatory impact assessments. In other words, to apply those laws in the virtual space and see the future in the virtual space and see who is going to be impacted negatively, made hungry, made poor, and be delayed in terms of getting the operation that they were supposed to get. who was going to be excluded from education, who was going to suffer more GBV, etc. They didn't make that anticipatory assessments. For example, my country decided everyone must buy from supermarkets and that everyone should go into the digital space. The impact was that the poor got poorer and the moderately rich fell off and became poor, and the poor and the rich got richer. So it's not surprising that supermarkets in many countries got richer. It's also not surprising that globally, millionaires increased whilst poverty decreased. Well, whilst poverty and hunger increased. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Prof. Madonsela. And so for our next speakers, please take note when the time limit comes, the gentle music shall, shall come on. And so I would like to now invite Ms. Nkatha Ntoburi, who is going to speak to us about human rights and hunger, analysis of the intersection of social protection systems and agri-food systems for food security. May I ask that we flight her presentation, please?
I have been told that I have 6 minutes, so I'm already cutting down my slides mentally before they appear. Can we have the slides up, please? So my presentation is titled Connecting the Dots. Where are these gaps that we're talking about when we're looking at rights, social protection, and the broader agri-food systems agenda? Now, when we look at the rights, social protection, right to social security, and the right to food are intrinsically linked, all reflected in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights, among other international frameworks. Now, when we look at how this right to food and the right to social security is defined, states are obligated to protect, fulfill, and respect these rights. And they're anchored on various dimensions, common dimensions of availability, adequacy, accessibility, affordability, and universalism, ensuring that everyone enjoys these rights. It's also anchored on aspects of without discrimination. But where are we in terms of realizing these rights? And we're going to analyze this based on those dimensions that we've looked at. The previous speakers from yesterday and today have talked about the number of people globally facing hunger. We have about 9.1% of the global population. So to speak, 20.4% of the population in Africa faced hunger in 2023. And as we can see, the projections are about 582 million people will face hunger by the end of this decade. Now, what is interesting to note is that we were on the right trajectory before COVID. And predictions were that the numbers of people who are going to experience hunger are going to decrease, but we are seeing a significant rise post the COVID period. Also looking at countries that are predisposed to food insecurity, crisis countries, you can see that most of them, majority of them are in Africa, where we have about 58% of people, the prevalence of moderate or severe malnutrition standing at 58%. On aspects of affordability, when we look at the food price index for 2020 to 2024, we are seeing a decreasing trend in prices of food. But we are also seeing that the numbers are way above the index that was there before pre-COVID time. And this is really driven by many factors, including the conflict and the wars that we are experiencing globally. Now, in terms of affordability, have we asked ourselves, what is the cost of a healthy diet? How much would it cost someone in this country to buy food, a healthy diet? Imagine $3.9. How many people can afford that per person per day based on purchasing power parity? So these numbers really show that there's urgency for us to look at what really is the issue in terms of addressing aspects of food security. Now, I would like to speak a bit about our agri-food systems, and these are the systems that are responsible for provision of food. Indeed, globally, they employ about 4 billion people and produce approximately 11 billion tons of food. They are the largest systems in terms of employment and economic contributions. So looking at these dynamics, where are we failing considering the vast potential of our agri-food systems? We are seeing that our agri-food systems are ineffective, and there are significant inequalities within the agri-food systems that are hindering the realization of zero hunger. And for this conference, allow me to focus on the key driver of social inequalities. While there are many other drivers within the agri-food systems, we are going to narrow it down to the social aspect within our agri-food systems. And here we see that about 80% of the rural people are poor. 2/3 of the people in the rural areas responsible depend on agriculture, and these are the fisher folks, the subsistence farmers and others. We are also seeing that poverty is 4 times higher among agri-food dependent communities and individuals vis-a-vis those who are working in other sectors that are non-agricultural. And when we bring it down to our continent in Africa, we see about 60% of the poor people are in sub-Saharan Africa. So what does this tell us? Where are we failing? Is it that we are just going to look at the big companies that are responsible for commercial production of food, or do we really want to also look at the social injustices that propel the situations and the numbers that we are seeing? Now, previous speakers also talked about climate change and how it's driving poverty and gender inequalities. A recent report by the FAO indicates that an annual increase in temperature by 1 degree will result in a reduction of 34% of incomes for female-headed households. The unjust climate, I challenge you to take a look at that report. You will see the significant impact of climate change on the poor and vulnerable and those responsible for producing our food. Now, when we look at issues of gender, we see that about 60%, over 60% of the work of women is within agri-food systems. The question is, how many of these women are covered by Social Security? How many of them have access to unemployment benefits, maternity care? These are the people that we are depending on to produce our food. So, based on those aspects, our analysis shows that social protection can enable the right to food. And when we talk about social protection, it's the social assistance, social insurance, and other labor market interventions, including, as mentioned earlier by Speaker, school meals programs. We are looking at about 50% coverage, global coverage of social protection, and we have seen a 2% increase in coverage in Africa. And this is where we call for governments to really scale up social protection interventions, because they play redistributive roles, preventive, transformative, and ensuring that the social fabric within our communities is protected. Now, we see that the right to social protection is an instrumental enabler to the right to food. We have to protect the producers. We have to protect the small-scale farmer in the rural areas if we are going to realize food security. As I conclude, there are significant impacts of social protection on food security that have been documented in Africa and globally, and I challenge you to go and read about this and see how social protection can be used as an instrument to realize the right to food. And indeed, COVID-19 was a proof of concept. It is possible for everyone to enjoy the right to social security and in tandem translate that to the right to food. We saw that between 2020 and 2022, there were over 3,900 social protection measures taken to cushion populations from COVID-19 impacts. And we saw governments increasing their expenditure in these measures for up to 2% of the GDP. Now, the ILO predicts that an investment of 3.3% of the GDP is enough to to cover majority of those who are in need of social protection. In fact, social protection coverage for all. So it is possible. The question is, do we have the political will to do so? As I conclude, what do we want to take away from here? We must promote policy coherence. It's not an aspect, a responsibility of governments only. It's not a responsibility of the ministries of agriculture to realize, zero hunger. It is collective efforts, multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral. Everyone has a role to play in this. So policy coherence, legal frameworks must also integrate these aspects, looking at how do we reduce inequalities and poverty to address the issue of hunger. Universal social protection. South Africa is taking over the baton on the G20. I'm hopeful, and we said this morning that we have hope that we will be able to advocate for issues of rights, particularly the right to social protection and the right to food as our agenda within the G20 space. As I conclude, we must involve everyone. The rural poor, the farmers, the producers must be involved in this discussion. So our social dialogue is key, and measures must be put in place to ensure accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kata. You could see Kata concluded at least 3 different times, as I conclude. And I can appreciate this because she has prepared and she does wish to share her views with all of us here. And now I'm going to invite Dr. Samkelo Bala, who's going to speak to us about social death of farm dwellers in times of post-1994 transformative constitution. And he has indicated he would prefer to present from where he's sitting, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I greet as well. I always try my best to bring the African ontology, even where unnecessary. So with my greetings, I would start with the elders, and then it goes on up until it reaches my age. As given that I will be talking on the social death, which is the concept that I stole, if I may say, from Orlando Peterson, where perhaps he articulates the slavery and the social death to pronounce the precarious living conditions they have experienced. Then when I was doing my research in farms, perhaps in terms of how they still experience the conditions that inhibit them from accessing the constitutional rights, or what Professor Tsepo Madlingozi as New South Africa being left behind, the proverbial bridge. So I felt like perhaps they are also experiencing this social death. But the question was why and how in the time of post-1994 with transformative constitution. I think as Prof mentioned as well that they seem to have been left outside perhaps to this South Africa. I think I also had some quote that I took from the reflection that Prof you made with regards to celebrating the 30-year democracy. If I quote, is perhaps I was too naive to think that the structural inequalities created over 3 centuries could be rooted out in 3 decades. So that means perhaps there's a system that is still continuing to exist in this post-1994. Some have been strong and mentioned those. But myself, I'm in the position of reconceptualizing this hunger and this poverty as a social death. As perhaps you would see in the very huge work of Professor Adam Gary, I'm sure those who are in their legal studies would know. He feels like we need to conceptualize the issue of poverty because the conceptualization that we have now is flawed to an extent that it has led to informing the welfare and the policy interventions to poverty that are not meeting what is on the ground. he makes a very good justice in that he explains in detail the etymology of welfare as well as the client, that we treat those who are in poverty, poor or hunger as clients. But his strong analysis is that a client is someone who is spoken for, not speaking for himself or herself, meaning which the social welfare or the policies have a position of perpetuating that social death as well. So the question is again on the issue of how they are not socially dead. In terms of social death, I will not give an etymology as well. But President Ramaphosa, Cyril Ramaphosa, in his opening of the parliament on the 18th, he confirmed what Prof also has mentioned, the black social exclusionary structure of South Africa in terms of abject poverty and barriers to economic opportunities. Abject is one step synonymous to a dishonorable situation, which is a significant element of social death. That means the person is not existing, as Orlando Peterson would say. Professor Ndlovu-Katsheni explains this hunger and poverty in South Africa, converging with Professor Ramosa in terms of hellish life experience, where they are not even protected during the lightning times. Of course, when I went to do the data collection of this broader research in farms, even the house where I found those elders were staying, it was raining inside. So I realized that as well, as Professor Tsepo Madlingozi said. These people are trapped on the other side of the line, the forgotten line. That is to say, they are left behind from the proverbial bridge, as I have mentioned. And Professor Mudir as well, which is a very strong jurisprudence scholar in terms of law and poverty, articulates this hunger and poverty as an oppression. So meaning which that should be our initial point of view, to reconceptualize poverty so that it can inform what Adam Gary as in flawed social welfare. I think the law scholars will articulate that better than myself as a social worker, because even in his book he mentions social worker in a way that I was a bit not happy as well. He articulates that we should view this as a social degradation of those who are living in that condition. And perhaps importantly, as an injury and an attack that should be dealt with the same way that we have dealt with other colonial apartheid systems. Poverty and hunger on its own, without giving sort of proximity, you know, once you feel hungry yourself, you can feel losing the breath. Just hungry, not the hunger. How much more those who are living in the hunger. So now moving to the other part of my topic, which is the post-1994 transformative constitution. There is a word that is usually used by the epistemological African scholars, Sisa Sokola, which has two parts, the prefix Sisa and Sokola, which can be translated as poverty or struggle if you wish, depends on how you want to articulate it. The prefix, which is Sisa, is used in an event to indicate something that is supposed to end or was supposed to end. So whenever you ask the people from the ground, or I would say from Eastern Cape, the Xhosa-speaking people, they say Usisa Sokol, meaning which the poverty that was supposed to end, as defined by the late and the former Chief Justice Piers Langa, that the transformative the transformative constitution was supposed to be social and economic revolution, but there is a question of Sisa Sokol, meaning which this problem continues to sustain itself. So in this position, as I have mentioned, that I'm rather focusing on this as reconceptualization of hunger so that we don't find ourselves perpetuating this problem. There is another ontolo-epistemology that is found within the African context, where if you infringe someone's right, as it has been done by the government currently and the previously, more especially our parents, they would say, "You don't see me, awuniboni." Or if you are perhaps behaving in a certain way that is not relevant to the thoughts or the principles of the home, they would say, "Awuniboni, you don't see me." This is what is happening in terms of poverty and hunger in South Africa. To be quite specific, I would say the hunger has a face in South Africa, which is black. So the black people, in terms of even the social existentialism scholarship, they are not visible, they are not seen because of this infringement. Hunger, I believe, of food is a very basic human existent right or natural right, as Professor Ramosa would say. If one is infringed in terms of that, that means we are still far behind from reaching or achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, more especially Sustainable Development Goal 1. I know that we are speaking of Sustainable Development Goal 2. So now, on the other hand, as I am
Doctor,
concluding.
I was just about to invite you to wrap up, please.
Okay,
We
as
have
I'm
exceeded our
concluding.
time.
So, as I've mentioned, that this is an empirical study, articulating the precarious conditions in farms. There was a situation where the farm dwellers or the community members were denied even subsistence farming by this white new farmer who bought the farm, that they can't even do a subsistence farming. Natural right. Sorry. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I do want to invite our speakers, please, to cast your eye this side from time to time, because my body language tries to communicate something to you, but I can just see you so engrossed in what you're doing. So I'm just appealing that we try and work together to manage the time. I will now invite Professor Scott Drimi to share on his thoughts around going beyond simple frameworks that focus conflict and famine, and how we can do better.
Thanks very much indeed. So it may seem completely out of place on this panel, but what I do understand is that we have an opportunity to place things on the table, to be able to then drive some of these issues further into these discussions. And so what I'm able to do is to raise something that was suggested earlier in the previous panel with the diplomats, the issue of conflict and conflict-driven food insecurity, but to connect it to other issues, such as attempts to measure it, to analyze it, so as to respond to it. Fairly normative issues that the UN love, but can often perpetuate damage in terms of those normative frameworks. It also links to presentations that will come later, like my colleague, Professor Stephen Devereaux, who will be talking about another kind of violence that is normalized. And so that's the intention. So our role within the integrated food security phase classification as technical development specialists is to support a framework that is used globally to essentially measure and analyze acute food insecurity. And one of the great challenges that has emerged is conflict-driven food insecurity, which has become an increasing threat. The massive reversal of gains in the last few years in terms of addressing hunger, but also undermining fundamental human rights. We look at Gaza, we look at the Sudan, we look at Yemen. So when we look at our numbers of people that are acutely food insecure, that is where those numbers are dramatically accelerating. And so we have to comprehend and engage those. The IPC, when we apply a social justice framework, and I'll give an example of how we've done that, we can begin to challenge some of the normative ways of measuring by bringing in different voices, by perhaps being a little bit more sympathetic to some of those injustices that underpin conflict, and not take it as something that happens between two warring factions, but to dive a little bit deeper. And so just to give it a context, in the last year, according to the Global Report on Food Crises, 282 million people faced high levels of acute food insecurity. Of those, almost 140 million were in countries with conflict or insecurity related to violence. Another 21 countries, or another 75 million, economic shocks, and another 71 million in countries that were most dramatically affected by weather extremes. But when we look at those countries, like for example, where there are weather extremes, so often conflict is entwined within those issues. Climate change doesn't just impact on production and growth and yields, it creates and exacerbates and reveals social tensions. How do we understand that in terms of our attempts to measure? When we look at countries that are experiencing now the so-called extreme lack of food and exhaustion of coping strategies with a significantly increased risk of acute malnutrition and death, in other words, famine, we're looking at countries like Sudan, with almost 780,000 people directly affected now, the Gaza Strip, over 1 million, South Sudan, 80,000. It's quite extraordinary when we begin to interrogate those. What the IPC tries to do is to create a framework where there's different classifications. So we move from an IPC phase 1 where there's minimal food insecurity to a situation where there's famine. Now this is imperfect. This is the best attempt that we've got, and we have to continue to learn and engage with it. It brings in evidence in order for a group of people to be able to engage that evidence to reach technical consensus about an extremely political situation and to build consensus amongst those diverse stakeholders so that numbers can be reached. It is guided by protocols that ultimately allow those discussions and those dialogues to unfold. But it often comes short. It is often limited, particularly in terms of acute situations that are driven by conflict. The collection and the availability of reliable data in conflict situations. We know that in terms of what's happening in the Sudan right now or in Gaza. The unpredictable nature of conflict dynamics, how rapidly things change. The expertise that's required. People dealing with food insecurity often don't have the social training in terms of really understanding what is happening in terms of the impacts of violence on food insecurity. And this can misinterpret or provide incomplete analysis. So how do we address this? And our argument is that we can bring a social justice emphasis that isn't just about providing some abstract notion onto the idea of hunger or food insecurity, but that we can do it in terms of how we shape the narrative. So in other words, it isn't just about production failure, but maybe it's about the diverse perspectives of female farmers that maybe are brutally removed from a particular place for a particular reason. Maybe it's about bringing the diverse perspectives of non-combatants into the analysis. It's about combining traditional food security data with conflict-specific data, like, do we understand forced displacement patterns or the shift where armed groups are operating or battle events? And indeed, it's also then about, as Professor Bodonsela argued earlier, about our forecasting models, about using new technology, about considering things like the social justice impact assessment matrix, which argues, by intervening, are we perpetuating the injustice? Do we really understand what it is that we are recommending in terms of the future impacts? So just to conclude, we argue that conflict-driven food insecurity and addressing it and measuring it isn't just a matter of humanitarian response. It isn't just about technically improving it in terms of looking at early warning systems, but it can and should be a social justice issue, taking a rights-based approach that grounds it in some of these human rights commitments that our countries, our UN agencies have. And by integrating some of these considerations, we can deepen and improve our analysis so that we can ultimately achieve what it is we strive for. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Excellently done. All right, our last speaker is now Dr. Yvonne Erasmus, who is going to share on the experiences of those that are indeed food secure. Absolutely.
Good afternoon, everyone. So CERI is a public interest law clinic based in Johannesburg that uses litigation, research, and advocacy to challenge inequality. So because of our social justice grounding, we approach our work in relation to SDG 2 from a food justice perspective. So we argue for the rights of households to access safe, nutritious, and affordable food, irrespective of their economic circumstances and irrespective of whether they have access to land. So as the title of the presentation conveys, we start with responses from the ground and what the experiences of those who are food insecure tell us. In this case, we draw on CERI's clients representing inner-city residents, informal traders, farm workers, domestic workers, and waste pickers. Let's listen to their view in a short video that, Madam Chair, forms part of my time allocation. Technical team?
Okay, I think food is a part of life. You cannot live without food.
The right to food for me is life. Without food, there's no future. Food must be accessible to everyone in South Africa.
To us, food insecurity, it means that people, they can't access food, even though it's their constitutional right, but in reality, we know that they can't access food. We are hungry, we can't access food because of the prices in stores. The ones that they can afford, it doesn't have much vitamins and nutrition.
Ukudla kubalekile kithi singabantu sonke, angeke ukwazi ukuthi uyolala ungadlanga. So okunye ekubalelekileyo ukuthi sikwazi ukuzenzela ngezandla zethu. Silime, sifuye, sikwazi ukuthi sibe nento esidlayo. Singadepend emalini uze singadepend ekuthengeni uze sidle. Fanele sizilimele.
Sometimes you can go to work without eating. Then you say, I'll eat at work. Then you end up eating the food that is expired because we don't have money to buy our own food every day. And when we get home, we get sick about that. And we can't say about it because we are scared to get fired. We look after your children, we make sure the house is clean, but you give us expired food. That is not good at all, and we get sick. When you get sick, you get fired because you don't go to work.
Workers who are already earning minimum wage or less are then reliant on very meager handouts, often from employers, or sometimes food that's already rotten and old that's given to workers as what should be, quote unquote, their daily bread.
Thank you, technical team. You may bring up my presentation again. A longer version of this video is available on CERI's YouTube channel. So in addition to our interactions with client communities, we conducted our own legal and policy review, and then we used the FAO's 4 traditional dimensions of food security. So availability, access, utilization, and stability as a lens through which to view both the causes of food insecurity and the legal and policy remedies. So we know from our own analysis of the international and regional legal framework that all of the different dimensions of food security are acknowledged as important and in needing of policy and programmatic intervention. However, when we applied these dimensions to the South African policy and programmatic areas, we realized that there are some blind spots that are highlighted by our clients' experiences of food insecurity and the remedies that they seek. I'd like to focus on the availability and access dimensions. Although the country is not food insecure nationally, much of the policy and programmatic focus continues to rest here in relation to production or availability and in relation to what's called direct access or growing one's own food. Land-based livelihood strategies such as small-scale farming and urban food gardens is a complex area of intervention that cannot be separated from our history of land injustice and the need for both rural and urban land reform. And research has shown that growing one's own food ameliorates food insecurity somewhat, but also that land-based livelihood strategies face limitations, such as access to land, water, markets, and are often supplementary at best. So we argue that the policy and programmatic emphasis to encourage people to grow their own food, although undoubtedly important, has the potential to obscure what this solution that this solution might not be practical or desirable for many living in South African cities. And we therefore have to ask what food justice looks like for the urban population. An additional area of the urban food system that policies and plans have been largely silent on is the importance of informal traders. They are often regarded as a nuisance and are harassed and evicted from trading premises, even though they are key to how urban residents access food in appropriate quantities and at affordable prices. As you would have heard in the video, our clients articulate that a key barrier to their food security is economic access. But there is very limited direct policy intervention here. It's a real blind spot. There's a national minimum wage, which is not always realized in practice, and there is VAT exemption that has shown mixed results. The principles and guidelines of the African Charter of Human and People's Rights are clear that national plans, policies, and systems in relation to the right to food should ensure economic accessibility. We argue that a key intervention here could be the 10 Best Buys double discount initiative proposed by Grow Great that consists of a nutritionally diverse basket of food that is both VAT exempt and that has a price cap at retail to make it affordable. So it should be clear what it is that we're advocating for, and I won't go to my last slide. And therefore, in conclusion, food security is only realized when all people have access to safe and nutritious food. This is not a goal for the future. It's a social justice issue now. Thank you.
I want to thank all of our panelists, and I wish to advise as follows. I think we will take a group picture of the people that participated in this session, and I'm pleased to share that all of these panelists will be available at the parallel sessions that are still coming. There will be lunchtime, so there will be plenty of opportunity to interact and to probe further. What strikes me as I listen to my colleagues is that we are armed with quite a deep and thorough understanding around food insecurity. But I worry that we must not become experts in admiring the problem. And so as we close the session, I'd like to ask the question, what are the levers that we need to activate so that we can start to make progress towards the attainment of the vision of eradicating hunger by 2030? I thank you very much, and thank you to our speakers.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have one last session that keeps us away from lunch, and it's one last really powerful session, so I'm going to call up the speakers for this session. The moderator will be Prof. Julian May, who is the UNESCO Chair in Science and Education for African Food Systems, and Prof is going to be introducing the rest of his panel. I also just want to mention to you, just a gentle reminder that all of the social media accounts and information is at the back of the booklet. Please go and give a follow to the Center for Social Justice. Have a look at what has been shared, and please do share your thoughts, your comments, and takeaways from the rich conversations that are happening today. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Julian May. You can read about me in the program. I have a lovely panel. And if I could ask my panel to come up, and you can read about them in the program as well. Okay, so time is running out. People are hungry, they're getting unhappy, they're getting miserable. Sounds like COVID, doesn't it? And what do you do when that happens? You turn to civil society. Civil society, please help us. Please save us, make us not hungry. And civil society, guess what's happened? Here we are, saving them again. So what we need to do now, colleagues, we need to deliver a super fast punch to the head. Now, we did this before, colleagues. We did this at the Food Indaba, which was organized by civil society organizations here in Cape Town. We did this at Makers Landing, which is a venue not quite like this nice one with the flags. And the civil society panel set the fire alarm off again. So I'm not sure what it is about you guys, but please, can you set the fire alarm off? So, I'm going to start. Let me start with Asanda today. Let's get the ball rolling. We've called this lawfare. This is when we use the law to challenge the law. This is when we use the law to make sure that laws are just and are implemented in a just manner. How do we do that? It's been mentioned a couple of times. People have said, well, it went to the Constitutional Court. Well, it didn't just go to the Constitutional Court. Somebody did something. Asanda, tell us.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. I think it would be amiss if I don't start here. So, the law is a very important tool for activists. We're seeing it now in Palestine, with South Africa having chosen to back the Palestinian struggle. And I think, it's very important for us as civil society, but as humans, to always figure out ways to be in solidarity with people who are suffering. We have a situation right now in Palestine where food has been used as a political tool, as a tool of warfare. And it's not just food that's being used, it's every single structure that is available to the white colonial supremacist structure. And I mention Palestine because it's such a perfect case study of the ways in which power refuses to give up power until you speak to it in the violent language that it understands. And I think, the power of activists is to read and understand the law, is to use the infrastructure of supremacy, like the media, for example, because the media can be a tool as well, to amplify the voices of those who have been silenced, because there's no such thing as a voiceless person, but there are people who are silenced deliberately by systems. And I think that, when we combine the power of the law, the power of the media, and the power of the people, because, that's why in South Africa we say, amandla gawetu, because it's a call to remind us all the time that the power is ours, and that all systems that belong to humans can be subverted and subjugated by all, including those who are oppressed. And I think there are many cases in South Africa that show us that even when we think we don't have power, we have power. Even when we think we don't have agency, we have agency. You know, that is why the MK went to war. That is why Zaki Ahmad stood up today and said what he said, because we always have the power and we always have a responsibility to speak out. And the law is a very powerful tool in that can be used by those in power, but can also be used by those who want to speak truth to power. But we must also just remember that because this is the system, you know, they talk about the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house. As we use the tool of the law, we must also remember that it is man-made and can be bent to the will of the powerful. So as we use it, we must also remind people of its force to reinforce and to uphold the status quo.
Thank you. Nzame, you weren't at our discussion at Makers Landing, but you kindly agreed to join us today. Now, your organization, HELA, recently took on one of those organizations. We talked about earlier, it's the corporates. We didn't say who, what, where, what does this really mean? Tell us about what you did.
Thank you so much, Chair. And thank you for allowing me to join the panel to speak briefly. And I think in answering to what Gillian has asked about what did we do, because my comrade Zaki is here. The struggle of HIV included offending power and offending people. And if we want to address hunger, we got to offend power. We got to challenge power. And power means corporates, power could be government, because the design of the food system that we have is quite intentional. It's profit-driven, it's a monopoly. So as a consequence, people are hungry. So we got to tackle the problem, and it means confronting the power. One of the things that we did within HELA, what we continue to do in building power, and actually offending power, and power that want regress and no progress. And I think it's important to emphasize that we have been taking corporates to task. For example, Nestle, right? Nestle says its products, feed children. But we know that one of the things that Nestle did, and there you can see the injustice of power and corporates, was to put more sugar in baby products in the global south, and no sugar in the same products in the global north. Why would you put South African children exposed to food with excessive sugar? What was the justification of that? So the injustice of power and corporates, we got to confront it. We got to actually upset it, right? We got to also make sure that in tackling them, right, without fear or favor, because if we don't tackle power, the Constitution of South Africa says no child should go hungry. So that's what the Constitution says. But children, in the Eastern Cape, the Human Rights Commission reported children dying of hunger and malnutrition there. Why is that so? Why is it still happening today in a democratic dispensation? So it is very, very clear, and I think, Comrade Zaki, that we got to offend power. We got to confront power, we got to offend power. It's nice to talk in the round table like this, but we have to take it a step further and actually confront and offend power. So that was my contribution. So furthermore, there's a story, I don't know if you have seen, where my organization and a lot of people working in nutrition space, including academics, where we said, not today, Nestle. What we're saying is that these corporates cannot continue to break the law when there is the law. They still find ways today to break the law, which included advertising formula milk that was actually not supposed to be advertised to children. And one of the things in tackling them were like, this cannot happen today. It might have happened in the past. And you know, what ended up happening was just them stopping, you know, it was called a Stokvel, where they wanted to actually promote and donate, you know, classified milk to children and mothers using the Stokvel, a very important tool in South Africa, particularly for women, black and poor in particular, to raise money, you know, to feed families, exploiting those. So I think we have to call what is uncalled for. We have to upset power, and I think we will continue, including, you know, the duty bearer, which is government, right, has the duty to make sure that no one is hungry in this country. And I think until that time when we can show anger in the hunger, the same way that we have showed anger when people were dying of HIV, the same way in which we have showed anger, right, to apartheid and injustice and the indignified lives that people were living. Thank you.
You've got to offend power. You have to be unignorable. Okay, Mandy, let's go to you. Yes, you knew I was going to do that, didn't you?
Okay, hi. So, do I just respond? Well, for those who don't know, I'm from the District 6 Museum, and so you might be asking how I fit on this panel. And very briefly, the museum is not a project of the democracy. We're a project of our resistance to apartheid. And so our main purpose is to memorialize what apartheid destroyed, and in relation to food and people's relationship to food, that was one of the major aspects of reframing a segregated city that was in line with what was happening throughout the world in the 40s, 50s, where cities were being reframed for cars. In South Africa, race was being used, but the global movement to build cities for cars, to separate working class people from middle class people, to break up a city that was basically a very healthy city where people could walk and gain access to food, jobs, other important aspects that make a healthy life, clinics, hospitals. And so that's one of the key roles we play. However, what we've discovered in our democracy is that the tools and the strategies of resisting an apartheid city has never ended. It's still been required in our democracy, because we get our democracy at a point when the world is embracing gentrification of cities. And so while we defeat apartheid, people continue to be evicted from cities. And so we work in very close alliance with organizations like Reclaim the City, Difuno Kwazi, and we find in a lot of the activist work that we do for restitution, where restitution for us is not just about people getting homes, it's about creating healthy neighborhoods with, importantly, access to affordable food, affordable housing. We find that the law does not act in our favor. In fact, we're not just up against interpretation of new laws. We're up against new laws being created in the city, bylaws to support the gentrification, to support the closure of the corner shop, or the ability of women who are unemployed but with valuable skills to make food and sell it at affordable rates to others. And so all those healthy practices continue to be evicted from the city. And so the District 6 Museum, in terms of its memorialization process and our reliance on oral history testimonies, have a case, a very strong case, but we find that unless we engage in joint activities with the Difuno Kwazi and their legal center, as a museum that doesn't have funding, that works with a community that was dispossessed, and so unlike the Holocaust Center that can rely on a community that benefited from apartheid. We can't ask our community to fund us and sustain us. And so to fight the law, you know, to take all these cases for restitution to court is a very difficult process. And then finally, in the grassroots struggles we've waged with RTC, we've seen how we can win at the Constitutional Court, but lose at the level of implementation. Because injustice is hegemonic in the world. And we didn't defeat or gain justice when we defeated apartheid at the ballot box. And so, just to indicate.
So I've been hesitating who next, Gabriel or Zaki, and then Zaki just rolled his eye at me, and I thought something caught your attention there, Zaki. And I think, I'm certainly thinking, you know, civil society, maybe that's not the right word. It's sometimes quite uncivil, hey? Please, Zaki.
Ek dink ons is almal honger, né? I want to thank Professor May for putting us in this panel soon, and I want to issue a little challenge to Professor Madonsela. I've heard many times about this conference, but I want to put a challenge to Prof. And that challenge is that next year, when Budget Day happens, that we, everyone in this room, contributes money towards a hunger march. And we ask the city, we ask the Stellenbosch University, I see its chancellor is here, to help fund it, or to at least accept the funds that we are willing to give. Because we'll go away from here, and we'll feel so good about talking about hunger. Now, I want to ask here, how many people here are lawyers? Because this is a panel about law. Come on, hands up. Are you shy? You know, I follow Lenin's version on law. Oh, I'm not going to use it because it will be even worse than what happened to the German ambassador. Right? But what I'd like to say is Justice Cameron, I'm not a lawyer, so when I went to work for him as a paralegal at the AIDS Law Project, and I had to draft letters of demand, apart from Rob Peterson, no one had red-penned me so much. So I want to say thank you for teaching me law, even though I'm not a lawyer. But I want to go to your question about the Treatment Action Campaign. And law was critical to it. But I have a challenge again to researchers and law here. I'm so tired of seeing human rights law. So tired. Because the real laws affecting human rights is company law. It's the law of taxation. It's the law of insurance. It's intellectual property law. It's the law of property. And in Treatment Action Campaign, one of the most important things that we did when it came to research was science. And it was the women, the poorest women in our country, in informal settlements, who got to learn about science and got to teach others. It is those women who learned about intellectual property law and patents, which I'd never thought I'd read about, because you always saw a grey man with grey shoes and grey hair doing something about patents, right? But we learned about it. We researched it. And that is what we have to encourage people to do. I'm not saying the international covenants aren't important, but they mean nothing unless we deal with the World Trade Organization. They mean nothing if we don't talk about global taxation. Food is a global public good. It should not be we should not allow profit to be extracted. And then we pay taxes. And then we beg for aid, for development aid. No. If you take again HIV, one of the major demands of activists was for a global fund on AIDS, TB, and malaria. And there we had countries contribute, and the US putting up a separate fund called PEPFAR. And they've saved many lives because they treated medicine as a public good. Now we need to do the same when it comes to questions of food. Studying is one of the most important thing an activist can do. And if you cannot study law, anyone who can read can study law. Anyone who can read. Make words your friends. Make words your friends. And so I want to put a series of propositions quickly. The first proposition is that any struggle always depends on fundamental rights. And fundamental rights exist whether they're codified or not. No one has the right to take your life, whether it's in a constitution, in a law, or so on. And I agree with Edwin on non-human animals. But no one has a right to take a life. The right to life is inviolable. The right not to be tortured, the right to eat, the right to work. These are all inviolable, whether they're in a constitution or not. Our second step has to be that we argue from the basis, yes, of theorizing and understanding theory, but an incredible basis of the data that exists already. That is more than enough for us to riot about hunger. But no, we let people riot in luxury while people go hungry. So understanding data is very, very important. The third aspect is to build power from below. To build power from below. I'm going to use some impolite language. I'm working with the Disability Activist Forum. And I was sitting next to someone, and they shat in their pants because the government gives them 2 weeks' worth of nappies. 2 weeks' worth of nappies. They have to take from that measly grant to reduce their food intake in order to buy a nappy. And this is an older man, right? So the question is then, building power from below. We need to support as much initiative as possible for the building of movements. For the building of movements. The fourth element is building as many allies as possible. As many allies as possible. And those allies come from everywhere, from a local creche to people in the UN, probably one of the most useless bodies in the world. Not because it wants to be, but because it's dominated by the United States, it's dominated by France, by Britain, by Germany, and so on. For me, the critical question then is building as many alliances as possible, developing material so that we all can understand it, so we can all teach it, so we can all take it forward. So who's with us on the Hunger March? Who's with us on the Hunger March? Last, I want to say something about struggle and protest. When I got up here this morning, I did it with deep pain in my heart, deep pain in my body. I didn't do so because I like performing. I did not do that. And I will say this, President Mandela said, we are not free until the Palestinians are free. He also said that he will not denounce Palestinian resistance. He also said many other things, But let us make this clear. We cannot negotiate with people who implicated in genocide, ongoing genocide. Ongoing genocide. Because if we do that, we are giving away our humanity to the most powerful people in this world. The arms industry, the United States, Germany, France, not to mention Russia. So I would say this. My ma het nooit gesê ek is onbeskofte kind nie. She always used to say, Sakkie is een van die mees respectable kinders. And she even said, maar hy is dan so 'n goeie moffie. Right? So this I want to say. Be as rude as you can in every forum. As long as there's pain and suffering, as long as there are human tears, as Rosa Luxemburg said, that is where I'm going to feel at home, and that is where I'm going to struggle. But I will not do so without understanding what I'm struggling for, without learning, without the data, without building allies, and yes, being prepared to compromise when it is necessary and when it's possible. Thank you.
There were a few things that caught my attention there. One of them was about not only the laws that you mentioned about the property laws, but also the laws that criminalize poverty, that punish the poor. And there are no shortage of those, particularly at the level of municipalities, the bylaws, the ones that we tend not to think about. So that's an area to discuss. Gabriel, you have the most difficult task.
Yeah, I think, can you hear me? There we go. I think for me, I resonate quite a lot with what everyone has said so far. As a young activist who works in movement building and activating, not just here in the Western Cape, not just in South Africa, but with young people across the continent in different regions who are experiencing different suffering, whether that's the climate crisis, whether that is the different intersections of the climate crisis, energy, water, food, land. To me, the fight is the same. No matter what avenue you're coming in from, the fight is the same. And so one thing I'll just tag a little bit on what people have been saying here that will kind of not duplicate or replicate what they've said. I mean, Asanda, when you started speaking a little bit about, it's great to see that South Africa is standing on the side, of the Palestinian resistance. It means nothing if the South African government refuses to stop sending coal to fuel the genocide. And so it's lovely that the ICJ is happening and we're seeing such great successes. We are so proud. Cyril Ramaphosa is standing and insulting us by smiling at us and saying that he's doing everything in his power, except actually just taking away what we are actually doing, which is feeding the genocide of men, women, children, everybody. And so when we talk about, it's great to see that, we are in solidarity. True solidarity does not look like, I stand with you, I'm Mandel her. What it looks like is I'm willing to stand next to you and take that same bullet that will come to you. I'm here with you, not in I'm going to put a black square on social media, but I'm marching with you. What true solidarity actually looks like is your fight is my fight. Until you are free, I will continue to fight. And what it also looks like is if I'm in a more privileged position, is if I can be more radical than you can, that is my opportunity to be more radical. Now, what do you mean by radical? Well, Desmond Tutu once said, violence within context is justified. And so if it means burning tires, if it means throwing bombs, if it means this, if it means that, then we must do it. Respectfully, I'm so sorry, my future is being taken away from me. The future of my children one day. Sorry, there's words that I've got to be careful not to use. We cannot be complicit anymore. We cannot be silent in the fight against injustice. The conversation that's been happening over recent years within the youth struggle has been, why are we, every June 16th it comes, June 13th, we get an email or a message, hey, we'd love to work with you. June 14th, the link gets sent for Zoom. June 15th, we have the meeting because June 16th, it's too busy, for anyone to do anything. And then June 17th, nothing. Now we move on. Youth Day means nothing. Meanwhile, its origins was young people saying, enough. It was not, I will change the system. It was, I will uproot the system. It was, I will not exist within the context of oppression. There's no changing the system. So when I hear Zaki saying things like compromise, I say, hey, maybe, but at the same time, we cannot compromise. Because me compromising certain things is a comrade dead. And so when we talk about systemic change or systemic injustice, or we speak about this, anything to do with the system or the empire, if we want to start getting crazy about it and start talking now people switch off their TVs, but empire, dismantling empire does not look like changing it. We cannot, we cannot change we cannot change the system with the tools that were developed, the master's tools. But then why are we trying to change anything? The system is still one of injustice. And so when we talk about change of the system, we talk about uprooting the system, what it looks like is dismantling it. Not brick by brick, but wrecking ball, and then we take down and into that earth and we pull out that concrete foundation that's stopping us from growing on fertile land. A week ago, I was at the Pretoria High Court for a litigation because we were tired of shouting, change the system, change the system. We took the government to court. We are waiting for our hearing on 1,500 megawatts of new coal. That's going to destroy us, that we do not need. That will further line the pockets of the 1%. That will further enrich our leaders and not the majority working class black communities. And so, one thing that just struck in my head on the topic of law was standing in, and I'll close right now, was standing in that courtroom and hearing the judge speak. And in the judge speaking, not feeling something feeling off. I went to go and look up who this judge is, Judge Matters, that thing that you can search. Yeah, this man was, taking up arms for the apartheid regime. Yeah, he says apartheid was nothing more than the separation of races. He was asking questions about why are we focusing on black women and children in the court case. He was asking questions about, intersectionality is just a theory, it's a philosophy, sorry. It's not practice. So to me, we've used the law now and it's still wrong. So honestly, when we talk about systemic change, what it looks like to me is that march, but further to that, actually going into the ground. One thing I love about the play of music is I'll speak over it.
Gabriel, really?
But we need systemic change, and systemic change will only be met if everyone is willing to take justice. Amanda!
Okay, colleagues, you've heard from civil society. They delivered on time. I think it was a punch on the head a couple of times there. I think you've heard some interesting views from different kinds of people, different voices of the youth. The youth are different. Me too. And there's the Madalas. There's the Madalas who sometimes we heard things that the youth said and we went, no, not again, no. But that is the role of a forum like that, for us to, as was said by our diplomats, to have a dialogue. And now there's been a dialogue. No, Zaki, I'm not going to allow you to, sorry. You've had a dialogue. I think it's been nicely balanced. Thank you for being willing to stay that extra time. I don't know how long you've got for lunch. I suspect not very much time. 10 minutes. Hardloop, mense.
Can I please just ask everyone just to stay on stage for a group photo, this panel, and then lunch is going to be for 30 minutes. If you could go downstairs, grab your lunch, and at 2:30, you will make your way back here for the panel sessions and breakaway rooms.
Yeah, I'm gonna make sure wrapping up. Okay. Hello. For those who will be attending the parallel sessions, they're happening in different boardrooms. We've got about 10 ushers on the floor. For the moderators and presenters, please ask your usher where parallel session 1 is. Parallel session 1 is in the boardroom on the first floor. So the presenters and people who want to attend that session, it's on the boardroom on the first floor. Parallel session 2 is in the innovation